there, and welcome back to my channel. My name is Mia if you are new here, and I am the maker behind Knit and Grease. And for today's weekly sit down video for my, December series, I'm going to just sit down and chat with you and answer some questions that were asked on my November podcast video, which was the giveaway that I hosted on my channel for my 1,000 subscribers. I will jump into it. I am currently away for the weekend with my family, so I want to sort of sit down and film this quickly for you all so I can get it up for you tomorrow. So first I'll let you know what I'm working on. So I'm currently working on the family knitwork socks. And so you'll see there's two progress keepers there. One is marking a particular row count, and then the other one, which is the top one, will mark my progress for this video. I have my tea here. I have my phone with all the questions. So I'm going to go ahead and jump right in. I tried to somewhat categorize the questions, so we're sort of talking about the same thing. And then, I'll just get right into it. Again, because I am away with my family, you may hear some noise in the background, and I'll try to edit out any background noise as best as I can, but hopefully you understand that, sometimes we need to film under not the perfect conditions. So I'm going to jump right in with the first question. So these kind of first few questions are going to be sort of getting to know me and my making journey. And then, and then there are some knitting specific questions, some specific questions around knitting with certain yarns. And then we have a rapid fire at the end that was submitted by my friend Marjorie. So really excited. So the first question is from Paulette Weiss, and she asks, who taught you to knit and sew, and how long have you been doing both? So, I guess I'll start from the very beginning in terms of what I first started to learn, or what I first learned, which was actually crocheting. And so my grandmother, my father's mother, taught all of her granddaughters to crochet. And so when my cousin and I were 6 years old, my grandmother taught us to crochet. And, we started with granny square blankets, or granny squares, I should say, and then, progressed to granny square blankets. And then, I kind of here and there would crochet along the way. It wasn't always like a very steady thing in my life, especially when you're young, you kind of just pick things up, and I was into reading and books and sports and all that other jazz. So I would crochet like Afghans. So I feel like most people in my family have had a crocheted Afghan for me from my younger days. And that's kind of like the first craft that I got into. Then in terms of my sewing, my mother has always been a home sewist, or a sewist, I guess, of home goods, like home furnishings. Like she would, she would sew like the draperies, and she would like sew these like bathroom like frilly sets of like the early 90s and late 90s. She would sew, just homewares. And then of course, just out of necessity, if you need to tailor your own clothes, you need to tailor your pants, you need to tailor something else, a button falls off of something, all that kind of like practical stuff. So my mom taught me to sew that kind of stuff, and she was never a sewist of garments. And I had an aunt who actually was a seamstress. And so whenever I would go to the Dominican Republic as a kid and I would get to hang with her, she would show me what she was doing. She would design her own dress patterns and things like that. And she also used to crochet. So, we would crochet and sew together. And so that's kind of my sewing. So my sewing really was more so, out of necessity. So like hemming things, hemming curtains, or making some homewares. Very basic, like if I wanted to make a pillow for something, very basic, like, tote bags, just straight line sewing, I guess what I would call. And then I really got into sewing garments during the pandemic. So that's actually when I started sewing. So I kind of taught myself through YouTube videos. But in terms of the original techniques and all of that, that was from my mom. And then knitting, I picked up when I was in college. So my university was hosting a knitting and breathing workshop that I wanted to take, but you already had to have known how to knit. And knitting was something that I was always interested in learning how to do. So I took a class at a local yarn shop at that time in Hoboken, New Jersey. And I learned to knit from the lovely Margot of 1010 Studio, who now works for Barocco. And so she taught me to knit, actually. And so I took a beginner's knitting class, and then I never looked back from there. I also took the workshop at my university, and I remember it was my sophomore year in college, so I was like just before I turned 20 probably. And yeah, it was just a really tough year. I was having a really tough time. And so I sort of dove headfirst into knitting. And I remember like late nights in the stacks, I would have my knitting with me. So like whenever I needed to take a break from my studying in the stacks, I would find a couch and knit away. And, all my friends knew me for all my different knitting projects. So that's kind of the journey of my three main crafts that I do these days. So with that, I'll get to the next question. I think I kind of answered some of that, which was from Audrey Moultrie. I hope I'm pronouncing that correctly. She said, I was wondering if any of your relatives inspired you to learn these crafts, and if not, what was your inspiration? So that's kind of it. I've always had very crafty relatives. Some of it also just by way of being immigrants and, making things work and extending the life of things. And that's kind of where I got in. Like, I guess sustainability now is like, the quote unquote cool thing, but sustainability has always been a part of my life, right? Reusing things, mending things. And so that's just always been a part of who I've been. And I've had some wonderful, wonderful women who have taught me along the way. And so then that also answers Queen's Yarn Boutiques. She asked, do you crochet or spin? And so I do crochet. I do not spin, although I did get my first fleece. Funny enough, so that we happened to be at my sister's house. I did get a fleece for free from a local farm here, and so that's gonna be my next thing that I sort of foray into. Is just like first I gotta clean it, but learning how to comb it and how to spin it and all that kind of stuff. Maybe get a wheel, who knows? So I'm excited to learn that, but I do crochet. So the next question that's crafty related is from Gina Belgrave, and she asks, I love that you also sew. I have combined my knitting and crochet and have some ideas of combining sewing also. Have you considered combining them also? So, in terms of my knitting and crochet, sometimes, some patterns will call for different crochet details, like a crochet bind off, or my favorite provisional cast on happens to be a crocheted provisional cast on. I'll use sometimes crochet, like if I want to crochet like just give a little bit more structure to a neckline or something like that. I haven't actually combined the two where, let's say, I knit a garment and then crochet an edge on it. I wouldn't be opposed to doing that. That's actually, I think that there are some patterns like that out there that are really cool and really interesting, especially because I think ooh, excuse me. I like the look of crochet kind of lace work edging a bit more. I think for me it looks cleaner sometimes than if something has like a lace knitted edging. If something is like meant to be lace all throughout, that's different. But I feel like when you have like a decorative edging, I think that like crochet lace work looks a little bit neater and also holds up a little bit better in terms of the structure. So yeah, so I mean, it's not something that I've done really, but something I would be interested in doing. I remember once upon a time, years and years ago, I did sew some pillowcases and then I crocheted a border, like a lace border around them. So I have done that, but that was like many, many years ago. And I haven't necessarily combined like my love of knitting and sewing in a way that's like a knitted and sewn project like that you see both. I have like a hat, like sometimes like I have hats and I'll some of my hats I'll sew satin linings in. Like if I have a couple hats that I've knit so that I can wear them when my hair is curly. So for those I've like sewn satin linings in them for curly hair maintenance. But in terms of actually like having a project that's, sewn and knitted or crocheted and knitted, not really so much. So let's see, what's our next question? And so my next question is funny. So I just changed jobs, so this is interesting. So it is from Sarah Loves Donuts, and she asks, "What do you do for work?" And so I recently changed jobs, still within sort of the same sphere of what I do. So I work in human resources. And so my career in human resources, I started out as a generalist, then I specialized into benefits. And now I am doing what is called change management. So I work on the HR technology and analytics team. And so what we do is we make sure that all of our HR technologies work correctly. We actually just transitioned to a new HRIS as of last week. And so that's going to be a multi-year release process until we get all of the components of the HRIS up and running. And then so as someone who works in change management, I'm responsible for documenting all of the changes from the current process to the future process for any new technologies that we are bringing in. Also making sure that we are documenting our process flows. We're creating process manuals for those that are going to be using the software. And then I also, if it's a employee facing software change, I develop all of the communications and also all of the trainings and also lead all of the trainings. So for the past 4 weeks, I have been probably training about 10 hours a week, which is a lot of training. So my voice is definitely a bit tired. So it's a really cool job because no 2 days are the same. And then with this particular release also, we are doing all the data behind the release also, so that's part of my job. So analyzing how many people are using the tool, what they're using the tool for, and then the questions that are coming in from employees, analyzing those, the number of questions, the types of inquiries, and then that will help to shape our future trainings as well as any FAQs that we develop, etc. So it's a little bit of everything. So it's training, communications. I need to know the HR technology, and I also need to know the processes at some basic level so that I can assist in, writing all of those process manuals with the help of the SMEs or the subject matter experts, whereby, I will take a first stab at a process manual, hand it over to the SME to take a look at it, review it, make any edits, and then ultimately I'm the one who sort of owns making sure that all of our documentation is always kept up to date. So yeah, it's a really interesting job. and I'm really enjoying it. It's really a stretch for me, and I'm having a lot of fun doing it. And I recently got a promotion for or I just recently was notified that I got a promotion, which will be effective in January. So still same change management. So I think that it's going well, and I'm excited to see what the future brings for the projects that we're on. This particular technology, as I mentioned, is going to be a multi-year process. However, next year we're actually going to be launching a different technology as well. So anything that's HR technology related. So you can be a tech person and be in HR. Not that I was a tech person ever, and I'm in HR, but you can do so. So there are ways to use your tech knowledge. And so the last question that's kind of life related before we get into some of the knitting related questions is I just lost it. It's from Brenda Bloomfield, and she said, I love all your plants. Can you give us a tour of them? So in terms of giving you guys a tour of my entire house, because my entire house is a jungle, I would never feel comfortable doing that. Although I do give you some sneak bits and pieces in my different videos of my house. I just, for privacy reasons, I wouldn't show my entire house, but I do have quite a large plant collection. If you actually watch my vlog that went up just this past Wednesday, so I forget what date that is, I do have a somewhat tour of sorts of the downstairs of my house, and so you'll get to see quite a few of my plants there. But yeah, I have plants everywhere. I have plants in my bedroom. I have plants in my bathroom, in my bathtub, downstairs, upstairs, in my studio. I have them everywhere. And so when you see some of my videos too, I actually will strategically move my plants around to film. So my podcasting setup, that's not how that part of my bedroom, that's actually my bedroom. That's not usually how that part of my bedroom is normally set up. I actually move certain things over to that side. So you are kind of seeing a lot of my plants. I just wouldn't give you a full-on tour of my apartment, if that's okay. So now I do have, the next couple questions are Nutiden or Unspun yarn related. And then I have some general knitting questions. And then I have my rapid fire section. So the next question is from Julie W. And she asks, how do you know how much Nutiden you'll need for a project? I have purchased a few colors in larger quantities and have no idea how to judge. So first and foremost, I think that, Caroline is very helpful with the various Nutiden colors and blends. She'll actually be able to help you if you have a specific project in mind with a specific color in mind. She will help you figure out how much yardage you need for the project because each of the blends is slightly different. But they usually, I think from their Ravelry page, they usually are something like 500 to 575 yards per plate or something like that. So usually when I want to just roughly estimate something, I just divide by 500 and then I figure it out from there. And obviously if you need to double the project, then you'll want to double your total yardage and then divide by 500 to figure out how many plates you need. It's not an exact science, but it will work. In terms of the yardages or the amounts that I usually get. So if I'm planning on knitting a sweater, depending on the type of sweater, if it's a full length, full-on sweater, I'll get 600 grams. And then depending on the pattern, I may end up with some leftover or not a lot left over. So for instance, my Saglin pullover that I purchased, that I recently knit, I purchased 600 grams and I think I used just over 450 grams. So I could have gotten away with 500 grams, but because I wanted a fuller length garment, I wanted to make sure that I had enough. With Nutiden, it's always the best to order an extra plate or two that you think that you'll need, because once it's gone, it's gone. And then you can always destash if you want to, or knit something else. Like I'll probably start knitting some like stripy Kura socks soon with some of my leftover Nutiden. But yeah, for a sweater, and just for reference, I'm usually a size like large, extra large. I have a 44 to 46 inch bust. So I'm usually like, what with most patterns, I'm like usually like a fifth, 5, 6, or 7, depending on the size range of the patterns. So I will get 600 grams. If you're a larger person, you might need more. If you're a smaller person, I think 500 grams is perfect for sweater quantity. For shawls, you're gonna need 300 grams. And then, you know, kind of from there you figure it out. But again, the rough math that I do is just I go by 500 yards per plate, and that's the math that I do. But if you wanted some more precise math, Caroline would be able to provide you the yardage for each of the blends for the plates. So I hope that helps. And I think I'm actually, especially with some of these questions that I'm getting around Unspun, I think I might actually put out like an Unspun tips video. Let me know if that's something that you all will be interested in. So the next 2 questions are about Unspun as well. The next one is from Mary. She asks, as an advanced beginner, what tips do you have for knitting with unspun yarn? And so again, I think I'm going to put out a full-on video on this, but it also depends on the Unspun yarn brand. So Nutiden is much more fragile. So usually I only knit Nutiden held double, or I will hold it with a silk mohair. And then, so that will give it some more structure when you're knitting with it. A yarn like Nutiden that's a little bit softer, I actually don't knit straight from the plate. I pre-ball it, and then I knit from balls. An unspun like Plotulopi has a lot more structure and is not as fragile, so I will knit straight from the plate. I will knit single, I will knit double, I will hold it with silk mohair, etc. I haven't knit with too many of the others, and I definitely do want to try some of the other brands, but like the Mantelope, I think it is, from Wool Dreamers. I've heard that that one is somewhere between a Nutiden and a Plotulopi, and that one already comes spun double or plated up double, so you can just knit straight from the plate. But the biggest thing for a beginner when you're knitting with unspun yarn is getting your tensioning correct. So you don't actually want to tension your yarn. So you want to make sure that you're really choosing the best needle size for the pattern, and either knitting a pattern that calls for unspun yarn, or I would actually gauge swatch first, figure out what gauge you like, and then pick a pattern. So those are my 2 things. Like if you are knitting a pattern that calls for unspun yarn, you should be good to go. But if you're trying to knit a pattern that does not call for unspun yarn, definitely want to gauge swatch first and then back into the pattern, rather than having the yarn try to fit the pattern that you want to knit, if that makes sense. And then the last question around unspun yarn that I have is from SRD Ladybug, and she asks, or they ask, I love your beautiful sweaters and notice you use more unspun type yarns. Why do you prefer that type of yarn over others? And so, yeah, I think that I sort of kind of dove in head first with unspun yarn and like really fell in love with it. I first knit with Plotulopi, then I knit with Nutiden, and now I knit with both. And so I think that firstly it's just very natural. I also like from the Plotulopi colors, I don't use any of the dyed colors usually. I use the natural colorways, but I think just as I've gotten older, I've just gravitated a lot more toward the natural yarns in general. So non-superwash, more rustic yarns. And I found that with, because I have eczema. And so believe it or not, while rustic yarn can sometimes be itchy, it feels a lot better for me when when I get hot, than something that's like like a superwash blend, where then I feel like my sweat for is not like evaporating. So it's really just more so about being comfortable. I just feel like it's more natural, it's a lot warmer. I can go out in a hat and a sweater sometimes in like 20-degree Fahrenheit weather and go for a hike, and I don't need a jacket. So it's very insulating. It's very lightweight also. So that's another thing. Probably one of the biggest reasons is it's very warm while also being very lightweight. And with Neutrogen specifically, I don't know what it is. It's just something about it when I'm knitting those stitches with Neutrogen. It's just so relaxing, and it just like kind of puts me in this very peaceful place. It forces me to slow down my knitting. I am a pretty fast knitter, not on purpose, just the way that I am, but with unspun yarn, you have to knit very slowly, very intentionally, and just really focus on what you're doing. So I've actually, with knitting with unspun yarn, I definitely practice my, knitting and breathing practice a lot more. So it's just something that brings me comfort, and that's really it. But in terms of just knitting in general, I've definitely just transitioned more so to knitting with your non-superwash yarns, natural yarns overall. So like for instance, even though this is a commercial yarn that I'm using, it is Patton's. It is their classic wool worsted. That's a non-superwash wool. So it is still pretty rustic while being at a good price point. So yeah, so unspun yarn aside, you can definitely get those rustic, natural, non-superwash yarns at pretty decent prices. From some of the bigger yarn producers, they do have those at relatively good price points. So let's see. The next question is from Enid Weiss, and she asks, I get overwhelmed when trying to order mohair amounts of vests and pullovers. How much mohair do I need to hold it with another fiber, such as a fingering weight or a DK? Is it the same yardage as the pattern recommends for the primary yarn or less? And so for that question, you just use the same yardage. So if you're going to hold it double, you just use the same yardage. So let's say, you're knitting a hat. The hat calls for 250 yards of DK weight, and you want to hold your mohair, then you would use 250 yards of your mohair. Just keep in mind that even though it doesn't look like mohair will add to your gauge, because it is a lace weight, it will plump up your gauge. So your gauge will be a little bit tighter. So the next question is from Des Knits, and they ask, do you have any patterns of your own? And I don't. We'll see. Right now, I don't think that I have the bandwidth or really desire to knit or to design anything, but that might change in the future. Who knows? And then Kimberly Roloff asks, when you knit stranded color work, how do you hold your yarn? In one hand, each color, in a different hand, pick up and drop yarn. So actually, I recently filmed some B-roll of me working on my Ruka sweater for Sari Nordland. And that B-roll that I'm going to try to insert right here shows me knitting my color work. And so the way that I knit color work is I knit my dominant strand in my left hand. So the color that you want to pop, I hold that one in my left hand, continental, and I tension it how I normally do, which when I tension yarn, I just wrap it around my pinky once, and then I hold it like that. So I hold that the same way that I normally would. And then my non-dominant yarn I hold in my right hand and I throw English style. And so with that yarn, I will not tension that yarn. And that's just because naturally my English knitting is tighter than my continental knitting. So I just do that to make sure that I get an even gauge. So my color that I want to pop in my left hand, tensioned as I normally would. My color that is not the dominant color in my right hand with no tensioning. And then just in general for color work, I will go up half to a full needle size depending on what I'm knitting on. Usually the larger the gauge, the less I need to go up in needle size, but at a smaller gauge I will go up a little bit more. So like if I'm knitting colorwork socks, and so that just allows for my color work, because my color work is just going to naturally be tighter, I found, so that just allows my color work to even out. So I do my gauge swatch in my primary yarn or my primary needle. And then from there, I've found that I don't need to gauge in the color work pattern. I can just go ahead and just adjust my needle size as needed. So for like my Ruka pullover, I keep saying cardigan, my Ruka pullover, the main needle size is a 7, so I'm using a size 8 to knit the color work. Let's see. Next question is from Freddie Tam. They ask, I tend to buy yarn for a pattern and then realize it doesn't work when it comes to gauge. Any tips for preventing that? Yes. So for gauge, you don't only want to go by what the yarn is labeled. You actually want to look at the yarn that the designer used. What is the yardage per weight or the meterage per weight for that yarn that they used? And so that's going to allow you to make sure that you get gauge. So for instance, you can get something that's labeled a worsted weight, and it could be a light worsted that really you could use for a DK pattern, all the way to something that's labeled an Aran weight or a worsted weight, but it's really more like an Aran weight, and it's going to give you a very dense fabric if you try to knit it at the wrong gauge. So that's my tip, is just not only paying attention to the weight class, whether it's a 1, 2, 3, 4, etc., but also the yardage per weight will, and getting your yarn at a yardage per weight that's similar to that one will get you the proper gauge. Tiffany Totally Knits asks, what is your favorite shawl pattern? And so I think I have 2. My most worn shawl pattern is the Ashby shawl. And I love this one, and I'm actually planning on making another one. I just got some, or I have some Nutidin in my stash that I'm planning on using to make myself another one. So that's my most worn shawl. It's also probably one of my oldest shawls that I've knit. I'll insert a picture here for you all to see that one. But my favorite shawl that I've been knitting recently is the Triangular Triangle shawl by Pearl Soho. And Pearl Soho, oh my gosh. And so I've knit the shawl twice already. I plan on knitting it again. And that one has become like a comfort knit for me. So 2 patterns that I like. My friend Ode asks, what is your next project you will be making for your husband? I have not knitted anything for mine since he lost the baby blanket I made for Benjamin, who will turn 13 in January, barely 2 weeks after finishing it. So my next project that I'm knitting my husband actually are these socks. So if you watched my last podcast, you'll remember that my socks were with the white cuff with the navy stripe and then the mustard body. But for this one, because I have the leftover, I'm reversing the colors. So my husband's sock will be navy with the mustard accent. So this is the next project for my husband, and it's been sort of my commuting knitting and now my knit and chat knitting. Next question is, do you have any go-to patterns, tried and true, that you go to over and over again? And again, I don't typically reknit patterns. I really don't. However, as I mentioned, I'm reknitting the Ashby. I've reknit the triangular triangles, and I plan on reknitting again that one again, probably many more times in the future. So that's kind of like a shawl. Maybe I just like knitting the same shawl patterns. Maybe that's what it is. And I actually have plans to knit another Carbeth, which is what I'm wearing today, just because I love this one so much. And I knit this one in Hue and Me, which is perfectly nice yarn. It's very affordable. It's a wool acrylic blend. And I love it. However, it is a bit heavy, so I do want to knit it in a lighter weight chunky yarn, just because this is just one of my favorite items that I wear, which actually leads me to my next question from Brittany Blackburn, who asks, what is your most worn knit? And my most worn knit is, or two of them, is my Ashby shawl, just because that one stays in the office. And that is my shawl that I wear every single day when I'm cold in the office. And then my Carbeth, which is kind of, if you all watch Young Folk Knits, which I'm sure you do, is my bougie sweatshirt. And so then I have one more question, and then I have the rapid fire. So let me go ahead and finish these last few stitches, which actually will complete my round, and then I will show you how much I got through today after the rapid fire questions. So let's see. And I'm sorry, I'm going to mispronounce your name, but I think it's Hasna Hajaram Hashim asks, I'm curious to see a sweater roundup. Your favorite sweaters, sweater flops, dream sweaters, favorite yarns to knit sweaters, etc. So actually, I think I'm going to turn that question into a video. So be on the lookout for that. It'll probably be one of my weekly videos this month. I do plan on having just an everything I knit this year roundup. So maybe that'll be one of my sit down videos. So keep an eye out for that, and that will be posted later on this month, if not definitely in January. And then the rapid fire questions are brought to you by my friend Marjorie. And so she asks a bunch of questions. So the first is, what is your podcast knitter's cozy drink of choice? And that's going to be an Earl Grey tea, which is what I have here in my mug today. Sometimes I will spice it up and do a lavender London fog, which is essentially like an Earl Grey tea latte. What is your dream destination for yarn acquisitions? I'm thinking I would probably want to go to, in terms of our yarn acquisitions, Iceland or New Zealand. I think that would be like dream for yarn acquisitions. Do you ever use your favorite cast on method or bind off method instead of the suggested cast on or bind off because you just can't help yourself? 100%. I guess I shouldn't say never, but I probably will never do a tubular sewn bind off. Just not gonna do it. I just do my own favorite stretchy bind offs and stretchy casts on for different projects, and then I have my go-to bind offs and cast on for different projects that I like to do. I very rarely use the cast on that's called for in a pattern. Next question is, if you can go back in time and give yourself a piece of advice from when you started your knitting journey, what would it be? I think that I actually was pretty, I don't know that I would give myself any advice. I think that I learned to knit with a very great group of women and people actually. We had a folks of all gender in our group. And I I really enjoyed that experience. I know a lot of people will learn to knit on YouTube or anything like that, but I had a really great community of people that I learned to knit with. So I really don't have any regrets or anything that I would tell myself. I mean, I think other than that, I think maybe I would have liked to get to love the more rustic yarns maybe a little bit sooner. But yeah, I mean, I don't really have any too much advice, and that's kind of maybe something that I'll give to you all as advice if you're a new knitter, is just feel free to jump in. And that's, I think, something that I was very grateful for, and I didn't realize, or I'm grateful for now. I didn't realize at the time. I was never scared to try to start a project because I always had someone in my group that was more experienced than me. So I think that you just need to jump right in, be fearless, and it'll all work out. And if it doesn't, you can always frog it, and you learn from that experience. And then the last one is just for fun. What is your zodiac sign? She is a Taurus. So the funny thing is I love Marjorie. She's a Taurus. My husband's also a Taurus. Hate my husband. Just kidding. I love my husband. But being friends with a Taurus and being married to a Taurus as a Cancer, which I am, are very different experiences. So it's so funny. Yeah, two people that I love very much in my life are Tauruses. My mom is also a Taurus. So 3 people that I love in my life are all Tauruses. I'm a Cancer. I am a water sign. Very much a Cancer. If you know about astrology, but in terms of all of my signs, my sun is Cancer, my rising is Libra, and my moon is Taurus. And that's probably why I bump heads with my husband quite a bit, because my moon is Taurus, and 2 stubborn people together sometimes don't mix. So yeah, so that's all I have for today's video. It did end up being a little bit longer than I thought it was going to be, but this is my progress that I've made on my sock. So from here all the way to here. I hope that this video found you well and you enjoyed today's little knit and chat. I'm in the process of filming a vlog for the Wednesday vlog for Vlogmas. So I hope that you will look forward to some nature scenes, which is probably what that vlog will primarily be. Otherwise, I will see you in next week's sit down video, which I think is going to be a recap of all of the things that I've knitted this year. I haven't decided 100% yet what next week's video is going to be. So until then, I will see you in the next one. Take care of yourselves. Hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend. Do all the things, and I'll see you next week. Bye.